Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is nice to be called upon. Can I firstly congratulate or reflect positively upon the contributions of the member for Mayo, Lyons, Braddon, Boothby and Forrest, who all spoke of the significance of Dame Enid Lyons. The member for Boothby told me that she hadn't really had a chance to properly consider her speech, but it was probably one of the best researched speeches that I've heard given on a motion of this nature, in particularly reflecting upon the emotional context in which Dame Enid Lyons would have given her first speech, to do so in the chamber where her husband had recently passed away, and to do so in front of so many whom undoubtedly she probably felt caused his early death through the stress that they had caused. Dame Enid Lyons was a pioneer for women in politics in Australia. 75 years on since Dame Enid was elected the first woman in Parliament, and she has paved the way for so many women to follow her journey to public life. Mr Deputy Speaker, in today's Parliament there are 76 women. Enid narrowly won the seat of Darwin in Tasmania for the United Australia Party at the 1943 election. At the same election, Dorothy Tangney was elected as a Labor Party senator representing Western Australia. She was the first female senator to be elected. 1943 was not the first stint at politics for Enid. She narrowly lost the 1925 election for the seat of Denison, losing by only 60 votes. Enid also supported her husband and former Prime Minister Joe Lyons. Enid and Joe were Australia's first political couple. Their children were the first children to live in the Lodge. In fact, the Lyons children were famous across the nation, with Joe and Enid inviting the press into the privacy of their home to take pictures of what was then a very new thing in newspapers. Of course, we need to also consider that in the 1920s, travel in Australia was not as easy as it is today. So for Joe and Enid, there was only one practical solution, and that was to move their family to Canberra. Enid and Joe campaigned together. Enid made speeches and radio broadcasts for her husband and also alongside her husband. They thought of themselves as a team, and a true team they were, sharing and advancing so many of the political ideals and ideas that formed much of early Australia. But when Joe Lyons died in office in April 1939, Enid's greatest contribution to public life was still to come. Enid was left a widow of 11 children. Her husband's death was tragic and a tremendous loss, not only for her, but for this nation, whose democracy at that point was less than 3 decades old. And yet she made the decision to enter Parliament in her own right, a decision that at the time could not have been one taken lightly. In her maiden speech, which many of the speakers today have referenced, a speech that no doubt would have had more poignancy than most other maiden speeches, given the circumstances in which they occurred. The anniversary of her first speech occurs next month. She must have thought very long and hard about what she would say in the chamber, given the death of her husband and given that many of the people who had known him so well and had come to cause him so much angst would be listening to this speech. She was re-elected twice, and after those elections, Enid became the first woman to be in cabinet. when she became the Vice President of the Executive Council in 1949. She was widely credited with the Menzies government's decision to extend child endowment beyond the firstborn child. This was a significant advancement for Australian families, a significant advancement for the federal government at a time when most people looked to their state governments, not to the Commonwealth, for such measures. To take this measure as the Menzies government did, and when it did, at a time when many people presume the role of the Commonwealth government was a very limited one, was significant. But it was also a reflection of not just Enid's, but also her husband's view that the family was core to our society, and anything that the government could or should do to help advance that institution, they should take. She advocated both fervently, sensibly, but most importantly persuasively, to raising allowances paid to return service women, and was outspoken against the debarring of married women from employment in the public service. I was amazed to read just only the other day that it was the Fraser government that actually got rid of the provision in the Commonwealth Public Service Act that said when a woman became pregnant, she had 6 months before she had to resign her position in the Commonwealth Public Service. Such provisions, it is amazing to think, Mr Deputy Speaker, were still in force during our lifetime. And when you think about those things, it is important to remember the massive advancements that we have made in the provision of equality of rights for all peoples in Australia, including, obviously in this instance, pregnant women who were employed by the Commonwealth Public Service. But the very fact that Dame Enid Lyons was talking about this in the 1920s and 1930s, and that it was not acted upon for 40 years, I think is a testament to the case that apathy and inaction, that things are not inevitable, that there are a current generation of people who believe quite fervently that things just get better. But this particular instance shows that it took nearly 40 years for something that was one of the core issues of one of the most important parliamentarians in the history of our nation to actually get advanced and to take effect. In this very emotional speech, in Enid's first speech, she canvassed policy ideas on a multitude, an absolute multitude of issues. These issues were very relevant at the day, but when we go back and look, they had extraordinary foresight as well in those speeches. So it was incredible that even back in the 1930s, Dame Enid was talking about decentralisation, something that, frankly speaking, we have continued to try, but it has not successfully happened. I had someone the other day talking to me about traffic congestion in my electorate of Mackellar on the Northern Beaches, and they said, didn't the Fraser government try decentralisation? Whatever happened to that? Well, in actual fact, I was amazed to find in Dame Enid Lyons' first speech that she'd been talking about it in the 1930s. The problems, she also said, talking about her political philosophy, that the problems of governments were not problems of statistics, but problems of human values and human hearts and human feelings. I hope that I shall never forget that everything that takes place in this chamber goes out somewhere to strike a human heart, to influence the life of some fellow being.
I thank the member for McKellar.
Can I move an extension of time?
Yes, you can.
So moved.
You have a 5-minute extension of time.
7? 5 will be fine, thank you.
Yes.
So moved.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So the issues that we find ourselves dealing with, and she put it so beautifully, I felt, that problems of statistics, the problems of governments were not the problems of statistics, but problems of human values and human hearts and human feelings. I hope, she's speaking of herself, that I shall never forget that everything that takes place in this chamber goes out to somewhere to strike a human heart, to influence the life of some fellow being. And I believe this too, with all my heart, that the duty of every government, whether in this country or any other, is to see that no man, and by which I presume she meant no person, because of the condition of his or her life, shall ever need to lose his vision of the city of God. Earl Page, the great National Party leader, nicknamed Enid the woman who wouldn't be sat down. Madam Speaker, I think that goes to the proud idea that she stood up for what she believed. And she stood up for what she believed at a time and at a place when often groupthink is too easy to accept and know. Others referred to her as the lady member. She was both literally and figuratively a lady, and the only female member of the House of Representatives. Dame Enid suffered from various illnesses and ailments during her life, and ultimately it was her ill health that forced her early retirement at just 53. We hear that age now, but of course in the 1920s and 1930s, life expectancy was much, much lower, and 53 was considered to be quite a senior age. Of course, now I hear 70 is the new 50. So as I approach my 50th birthday, I hope that's true. We owe her and Dorothy Tangney and their election to the Parliament a very significant debt. It was a very significant moment in our history, and we honour their memory. And I would like to say that I would like to thank all the members that to date have felt it proper to give speeches on Dame Enid, especially the members for Lyons and Braddon, and in particular the member for Boothby, who gave an incredibly eloquent speech and incredibly well-researched speech as well. Thank you.